Hello, folks, friends, and lizard people. We are here to keep talking about World War II. Now, this section is going to contain information about major battles, which, I'm going to be real, you don't really need to know about that much. So I'm going to kind of skim through them because, in the grand scheme of things, you really don't need to know that much about the Battle of Stalingrad. You should really know more about how to spot a Nazi, kind of a thing. So, and how not to commit genocide. These are good things. So we'll talk a little bit more about those than we're going to talk about the Battle of Stalingrad. So, okay. So last time we talked about the war in the Pacific. We talked about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lots of feelings about that, so do be careful and do be aware that everybody has lots of feelings about that. This time, we are going to be finishing up with our overview of the war. Yeah, it's a long war. And talking about some major battles. So, also, this was our picture from right at the end of the previous PowerPoint. This is from the Yalta Conference. The Yalta Conference is a very famous get-together between the leader of the United Kingdom, Churchill, FDR, the leader of the United States, and Stalin, the leader of the USSR, to talk about what's going to happen to Europe after the war and how they're going to reorganize it in February 1945, right before FDR's death. FDR is the one in the center, by the way. Okay, so the Allies start really heavily bombing Germany. The US and the Brits are coming from the west, and the Russians are coming from the east. And this is where we get East and West Germany. So we have, let's just make it a little circle, Germany. And the Nazis have essentially been pushed back into Germany proper. And so from France, we have the Frenchies, the US and the UK all come in this direction, and then from over in the east, pushing west, we have the Russians under Stalin. And then I want to make it very clear to you that even though in that previous picture we just looked at, all three of those world leaders were sitting together, were smiling, it looked like they had just eaten some cookies and getting along so well. Lies, all of them bold-faced lies. The United States and the United Kingdom and France were very suspicious of Russia. Russia was very suspicious of them. They were only getting along to get rid of Germany, essentially. So, when they come in, they are trying to get in and get as much territory as possible. What ends up happening is that they end up splitting Germany in half. West Germany is known as just Germany. And then East Germany becomes part of the USSR until about 1991-ish. I believe 1989 is the year the wall falls, and they split Germany down the center in the middle of the city of Berlin with the Berlin Wall. Since we probably won't have more time to talk about this, essentially Germany gets divided into a capitalist half and a communist half, and things are really intense because in East Germany it's run by the Soviets, and the Soviets are saying things like, Germany, you have to do what we say, and Germany's like, we don't really want to. We want to go be able to travel freely between East and West Germany and hang out with our friends and family, and the Russians are like, no, and the US are like, no, but less so. And the Russians are like, if you try to cross the Berlin Wall, we'll shoot you and stuff, and the East Germans are like, oh my god, what is this? And the Russians are like, Stalinism, thanks for asking. So finally, eventually, as the USSR starts to lose power towards the end of the Cold War in the late 80s, early 90s, because of a whole series of things like revolutions, from places like Czechoslovakia and stuff like that, we start to see the power of the USSR decline, we start to see the power of the West begin to go up, and the Berlin Wall eventually gets taken down in about 1989. East Germany declares independence from the USSR, and Germany is reunited. Having said that, you can still see some pretty stark differences between East and West Germany even today. There's only been so much that they've been able to do to counteract that in the past 30 years. Oh my god, it's 30 years, because that's how old I am. I can hear you. You're only 30. I know. Anyways, they also don't like communism. And this is part of what leads them into the Cold War and the decades-long fight against communism. And if you'll notice, this is still being thrown around today. I literally watched a video of some people who are protesting to open the economy again in certain states, and there was this lady yelling at a nurse go back to China, you commie. So, like, these are not, like, Americans are still not huge fans of communism on the whole, all things considered. And this is really where the Cold War is going to come from. It is born out of this distrust between the Allied forces at the end of World War II. FDR dies in April 1945. Dude, everybody dies in April 1945 because Hitler commits suicide on April 30th. Oh my god, it's coming up! How exciting! Anyways, he does in fact commit suicide. It's pretty intense. He takes a cyanide capsule, he shoots himself in the head, and then they light him and his wife on fire in a ditch. It's fun. I'm being very sarcastic. Death is never fun. So FDR dies in April 1945. Truman takes over because he was the vice president, and then I believe Truman has his own presidential run afterwards. Victory in Europe Day is May 8th, 1945. They dropped the atomic bombs on Japan on August 6th and August 9th, respectively. August 6th is Hiroshima, August 9th is Nagasaki. And Japan officially surrenders on August 10th, which is Victory in Japan Day. So we have VE Day and VJ Day. And the war is officially over, all things told, on September 2nd, 1945. So here's the German Reichstag, and the Reichstag is just like the German building, because remember we talked about they're the Third Reich. The First Reich is the Holy Roman Empire. The Second Reich is the pre-Weimar Republic, pre-World War I Germany, and then the Third Reich is the Nazis. So that was the Reichstag, or the German leadership building, and it's a little worse for the wear, as you can see. Here is the Japanese surrender. Oh, I forgot to add that in too. When we went to Pearl Harbor and we went onto the USS Missouri, this ship right there is the USS Missouri that the surrender papers were signed on. And so I showed it to you in class, but they had a plaque right on the spot where the table had been and where they signed all of the papers, and it was engraved with the coordinates of the surrender. It was pretty incredible. It was really incredible to be standing there on that same deck. Okay, so major battles. That's what it's called. Battle of Dunkirk. I'd forgotten. The Battle of Dunkirk is the one, and what I'm going to do over here is I'm just going to write down what the main thing is you need to remember out of all these battles. So, Battle of Dunkirk showed them that it was possible to use the channel. Possible to use English Channel to attack. Before that, they were like, we can't possibly use the English Channel. It's too hard and too difficult. But they had to get all of the people out of France using the English Channel. So they were like, well, why don't we put people back into France using the English Channel? The Germans were blitzkrieging France, and the French, the British, and the Belgian soldiers retreated and were trapped at Dunkirk, which was a beach in northern France. The Nazis paused for some reason. I'm not totally sure why. It's just a detail that I don't know. You should look it up. And it gave the British the time to get all of their people out, but it was incredibly difficult, and it was quite the rescue operation. They were, sending fishermen in little pontoon skiffs out across the English Channel. The Battle of Britain, a great name. I believe that's the one that John Lennon was born during. The Battle of Britain was when the Germans were trying to invade Britain, and it's very long. It's from July to October, but the RAF wins because of the Royal Air Force. The RAF wins because of radar. Ranging and detecting something. And it causes Hitler to cancel his invasion of England plans because it was just too darn difficult. So the British forces are called the Royal Air Force, or the RAF, and the German forces are called the Luftwaffe, which is a wonderful name. The Luftwaffe themselves, meh, but the name Luftwaffe, delightful. So, I believe that's maybe Dunkirk? I don't remember. Sorry, that's the Battle of Britain for sure. I believe that is St. Paul's Cathedral, which is still around in Britain today. That building a little less so. It is very weird though, because my parents and I went to London once, and we were wandering around this district in London, across the Thames over by the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's neighborhood kind of a thing, and we sort of wandered down this street, and there was a bombed out building. Just a shell of a building left. It was sort of poetic. It was beautiful. You just turn this corner and here's this, ghost of a building. It was really moving, actually. Here are some little grannies among the debris. Not a great place to have been. And here are some children sitting on a pile of debris, hanging out. And for those of you who've read the Narnia books, this is why the children are sent to the countryside. A lot of children were sent away from the big cities and into the countryside to essentially foster families so that they would not be in danger in the big cities from these bombings and the Blitzkrieg. I lived through the Blitz, you know. Okay. Operation Barbarossa was when Hitler pissed off Russia. Before Operation Barbarossa, Hitler and Stalin weren't quite friends, but they weren't really enemies. Russia was like, well, I mean, we had that good relationship at the end of World War I. Like, why mess with a good thing? They promised they wouldn't take any of our troops, not our troops, our territory. And Hitler is kind of like, oopsies, I invaded. Oops. So, Operation Barbarossa. Sorry. Is Hitler attacks Russia. This is dumb. Russia still has plenty of people to throw at Hitler, and so even though they really aren't better necessarily at war, they just have more people. I would like you to particularly note that many people died in prison camps. So, for example, about 1 million Germans, maybe a little bit less, died in Soviet prison camps, and then the Germans captured at least 5 million Soviet prisoners of war, and most of them died. They even had something that they called the Hunger Plan, where 2.8 million people died, and it was a planned genocide. So the Eastern Front was very serious. Just so that you're aware, Russia lost more people than everybody else combined, and estimated totals go as high as 26 million people. And then also there are estimates that after the war, Stalin killed on his own about 26 million people, so, that area of the world was kind of hard hit. Again, talking about Pearl Harbor is what gets the Americans into the war. Because before this, America also was like, I don't know that we want to get involved. I mean, yeah, Nazis are bad and everything, but, do we want to go over there and kick their butts? It's such a hassle. And then this happens, so America is like, we gotta go kick that. So America enters the war. I have long said that they should not have poked the bear. It's one of those, it's kind of like in a James Bond movie when there's not a body. They die, but you don't see the body. Dude, they're not dead. They're gonna come back. They're gonna get you. They're gonna pull a Sean Bean on you, and they're gonna come back and try and kill you again. You gotta make sure there's a body. And that's, for lack of a better term, that's essentially what happened here, is that the Japanese hit the Americans very hard at Pearl Harbor. Very, very hard, and it's very, very tragic. And they did significant damage to the U.S. Navy, but the U.S. Navy was able to turn it around really quickly and come full force, and the Japanese really weren't quite prepared for that level of quick turnaround. So, the U.S. declares war on Japan on December 8th, and Japan actually takes a whole bunch of other territory, like in the Philippines, and this is where we were talking a little bit earlier about the Bataan Death March. They marched thousands of surrendered Americans and Filipinos miles and miles and miles through the Philippines to concentration camps, and many, many people died, and it was one of those sorts of situations where, and the Nazis did this with people, moving them out and into concentration camps as well, and I'm sure the Russians did this as well. It happened often, where if you were on a death march of this variety, if you fell behind for any reason, you could not keep going, they would usually just shoot you or beat you to death, rather than wait. Or they would just leave you behind to die on the side of the road. But usually they didn't want to risk you escaping if you just, sort of stopped and sat there and then they moved past you. So usually they shot you. Or, if they couldn't waste the bullets, they would beat you to death. Cheery topics, I know. The Russians, 'cause cold. Well, Russia, I don't actually, those look like Russians, but it's been a long time since I've put these in. Bombings of factories and munitions and stuff like that. I believe that's from Pearl Harbor, but I don't remember. I'm sorry. Strafing. Lots of destruction in World War II. That for sure is from Pearl Harbor. Again, all of these things are just tragic. There is no other way, I think, to look at it. Okay. More major battles. Battle of Stalingrad. Because remember, after communism hit, they renamed all the cities after communist leaders. Leningrad, Stalingrad, stuff like that. The Germans try to capture Stalingrad. They are not successful. And so this is kind of the turning point in the Eastern Front. Can't capture Russia. Can't beat Russia. And then right about then is when Hitler starts having to pull his forces out of Russia to go support Italy. So it just means it's the death knell for his Eastern campaign. The Battle of Midway. Midway is an island in the South Pacific. This is where the Japanese fleet is trying to seize the Midway Islands, and they get crippled by the U.S. It's a 10-to-1 casualty rate. Japan is on the defensive for the rest of the war, so this is the turning point in the war in the Pacific. Isn't this what that new movie was about? I'm gonna come back to this in like 3 years and be like, what movie? Battle of Kursk is when it dragged on so long that Hitler had to call a retreat. So long, Hitler must retreat. D-Day, or otherwise known as the Normandy Invasion, is not only the largest amphibious assault in history, which is pretty darn cool, but the Allies are able to gain a foothold in France. Allies gain foothold in France. And again, this one was spearheaded by Eisenhower. Anybody know the name of the general over in the Pacific that we really care about? If you answered Patton, you are right. Battle of Stalingrad. Again, the word I choose to use is gnarly. Battle of Kursk. I appreciate past Miss Knappenberger for putting in captions, because honestly, to me, I don't have an eye trained for these things, so pictures of battles just kind of run together for me, and I'm like, aha, soldiers doing soldiery things. Except for the pictures of D-Day. These are very iconic photographs that have really just been seared into the public mind, essentially. These are soldiers in these amphibious boats. That means that these are boats, but they also can get really in close to shore and unload people. And oftentimes they would hold, I believe, like tanks and stuff, and so they would like get all the way up onto the shores and the beaches and drop off the tanks. These guys, they would usually get dropped off about there, and your heart just hurts for these guys because they're wearing pounds and pounds and pounds of equipment. Then they're trying desperately to like run first through the water and then up sandy beaches, all the while the German artillery is shooting at them. It was horrific, and so many people died, but the Allies were able to gain a foothold in France, and that is what helped turn the tide of the war. Okay, and then last but not least, the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies marched to Germany, but they've stretched themselves too far, so they have to have reinforcements to lift a German siege, but it's the last German offensive. And so therefore it's the last really major battle. Last German offensive. And then we've got the Allies coming from the west to the east, and the Russians coming from the east to the west to do sort of a pinching movement on Germany, centered around Berlin. And then, since I had space on this PowerPoint, I found some interesting stuff. The Day of Japanese Surrender is the only public holiday celebrated by both Koreas, both North and South. In South Korea, it is known as Gwangbokjol, meaning the day the light returned. So, I mean, like, what does that mean for J-Hope? I don't know. Moving on. And then also this is the same day that Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam to be its own country because Japan had taken over French Indochina, which is Vietnam. But then America is like, wait, no, Vietnam, you can't be a country because you're going to be a communist country. Anyways. Okay, so how was World War II different than World War I? We've got about a whole minute or two left. When I say less enthusiasm, this one always confuses people because in hindsight and in the passing years, it seems like there's more enthusiasm for World War II. because Hitler and the Nazis have been made into this grand evil in sort of the popular, especially American mindset. The Nazis are the bad guys in like all the movies and the spy movies and Indiana Jones, and the Galactic Empire is the Nazis. Like, the Nazis are this big evil. So it's hard to remember that Americans were really not interested in entering World War II. They saw it again as a very foreign war, a European war, not their problem. They saw World War I as having been kind of a really big mistake, and it led to a lot of casualties, and it was really hardcore and awful. They were coming out of the Great Depression, and they just really didn't want to deal with it. So actually, there was a lot less enthusiasm. Blitzkrieg is being used rather than trench warfare because of airplanes. And again, Blitzkrieg is where you have your... I'm gonna draw a really bad airplane. Woo! Yeah, your airplane. Whee! And the airplane drops bombs on the city below. And it's really easy to destroy huge amounts of territory. And lots of stuff. It's very easy to fly your planes over, to just drop some bombs and be like, well, we missed what we were supposed to hit, but close enough, we still destroyed a whole bunch of stuff. So this is the time period when planes are super important. And we have now even extended the power of planes to now they're unmanned. Now they are drones. They're not flown by actual people. So we can drop bombs on people without even ever going there. Also, we now have a very rapid movement of infantry, tanks, and air power over large areas. And most of this is just because everything is better. The tanks in World War I were rudimentary and could only go about 5 miles an hour and couldn't go over a big rock. And the kinds of tanks you get in World War II are much more advanced. They just are. And so it's a lot easier to move things over big areas more quickly. Initially, also, World War II is a lot more successful at the beginning for the Axis powers. They conquer most of Europe, North Africa, and the Western USSR really darn quickly. We talked about that, how Hitler, starting with Poland in like March maybe 1940, and by May 1940, he's got most of Europe. And it was so quick, and everybody was really taken by surprise. Maybe if they had tried the Schlieffen Plan again and Belgium had put up more of a fight, but they just really weren't expecting it, which is, in hindsight, feels really silly, because you're like, but, I mean, Hitler was building up his armies. And then the tide turned in 1942 because the Soviet Union was not going down without a fight. And then America came in, and America came in earlier this time. They had manpower and materials. So, again, Britain. Airplanes! Wow! Okay, so we will talk more about this. Just to warn you, we will probably finish the lecture in the next one. It might take a little bit longer. And there are some disturbing pictures from the Holocaust. I will warn you, and you may skip them in the video if you would like. I understand. If you do that, I will not judge you. It's totally okay. It's very hard to look at. I understand. I will not force you to do that. I will warn you ahead of time, and maybe I'll put like a slide in between that's like, hey, here they come, and then another slide of a really bright color to be like, all right, they're over now, because you don't have to look at this if you don't want to. You don't have to see it to understand how horrible it was. Alright, that's all we've got for this lecture. Folks and friends, lizard people all, thank you for being with me. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.